Hello, everyone. Warmest welcome. I see people joining. So we won't play some elevator music, but it'll be great as you join. To if you can share in the chat where you're joining us from today. I can tell you that Christian and I are in New York, and it's freezing over here. So this week we've been in the 5 Fahrenheit to the 20s today. So -15 and -5 for those in some other places. So hey, not the best not the best day to go for a run. Miami, okay, I'm jealous. Zagreb, that's fantastic.
Tampa Bay, I'm sure
Tampa,
it's a lot warmer there.
yes. Yes, some days I wonder.
Yeah, San Diego also very warm, I'm sure.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Boston and Chicago. Okay, guys, we also feel for you. No, not complaining.
Chicago, yeah.
Not complaining to you guys. Cool. I love to see this very broad representation. Um, Thailand, France, that's fantastic. And maybe we can start kicking off and warming up. And it is, of course, a blast to be having you today. And hey, Christian, and I want to start with his introduction. Um, no need to do it, but still, just in case, right? It's always a pleasure to have you here with us, Christian. And obviously, Christian Wattig is an FP&A expert, also known as the FP&A educator, right? So super insightful always. And he's got over a decade of leadership experience at multinational companies and fast-growing tech startups, right? And Unilever being one of them. Today, Christian directs the FP&A certificate program at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, and also shares his insights through his own training programs under the founder as the founder of the FP&A Prep and on LinkedIn. Over 30,000 finance professionals and business leaders subscribe to his newsletter, FP&A Tuesday. So, of course, Christian, it's fantastic to have you with us once more. Warmest welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this chat here.
Awesome. Hey, the topic for today is truly exciting to us, right? And what matters is also that this is going to be a masterclass series. We've partnered with Christian over 3 webinars, over 3 episodes to touch on a critical topic for finance and FP&A teams. How do you turn your budget into your operational plan? How do you turn all this effort and energy and long nights and weekends you put into getting that budget top down, bottom up, across the line into something that doesn't fall stalled very early in the year, and you make it the truly operational plan throughout the year so that you can continue having that strategic impact in your company, right? This is the dream, and this is what finance teams and FP&A teams are meant to be doing, right? And we feel very passionate and opinionated about this topic, and no one better than Christian to go deep into it. Hey, we'll have today the session about turning your budget into your operational plan. Next month, very exciting topic again about running your monthly business review, an anchor element to drive performance and accountability across the business. And we fundamentally believe finance teams are amazingly positioned to do that, owning the monthly business review. And then in March, we'll touch base on rolling forecast and ongoing scenario analysis. Okay, so this is the masterclass series we've prepared for you together with Christian with amazing content for everyone here. It's great to see more people joining from different places. We've got Switzerland as well and many, many more locations. So really a global audience for us, Christian, representing also our audiences. Cool. Just before we kick off, we have a short poll for you today. So maybe we can put that on a screen. And that will give us a sense of, you know, where the audience falls within, this updating your business plan. How often do you reforecast? How often do you update your business plan throughout the year? Cool. It'll be great to have your pool quizzes. I think it's a very relevant question, and also it'll give us a sense on where you guys fall within the spectrum. And hey, pretty diverse, pretty diverse. So I think we have, a little bit more on the quarterly side, but hey, from 25 on the monthly, 25 on the non, having a static budget. So I think this is going to be definitely a very good and a very interesting conversation as we strive to make our budget a more operational plan. By the way, please leave all your questions in the chat. Don't let Christian leave without answering these questions. Use the opportunity that he's sharing his time with us to go deep in the topics that you like and that you feel interested in. Cool. And without any further ado, Christian, let's kick off, right?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Hey, first question. As obviously you've spent a lot of time working with companies on their budgeting processes, right? Running them deep into those operations, but also, hey, advising companies as well, right? And building training programs. So in your experience, what's the biggest misconception about budgeting?
Yeah, so there are two main misconceptions actually that I often come across. So the first one is that the difference between the budget in the traditional sense and an operating plan, they're not the same thing. A budget in a traditional sense is, the projected profit and loss statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, and that's it, right? It's essentially what the company hopes to achieve in terms of financials. An operating plan goes a lot further. It also includes, your P&L, your balance sheet, your cash flow statement. But then in addition, it includes the strategies, how those strategies turn into tactics, and even how those tactics turn into high-level action plans for every department in the company. So it explains really, how we're trying to achieve the financials. And it's really important that companies, take it a step further and don't stop with just the financials, because otherwise it can become, it can be difficult to justify the budget or to be assured that it's actually achievable, right? If you just do the financials, you're too far away from what's actually happening on the ground inside of the departments that are hoping to hit those numbers. And the second one is, if you just have the financials, it becomes very difficult to really get value from comparing actuals to your static budget. Because if there's some difference, you can't really do much with it, right? But if your plan is an operating plan where you have strategies, tactics, action plans, and you see a difference between that and the actuals later on, then you can actually go and look at, okay, which of the tactics that we had planned didn't work, or maybe even didn't get executed. Maybe they got delayed. And then you have a much better idea of what's going on, and you can actually learn from the variance analysis between your actuals and your operating plan. So that's the first misconception. The second misconception is the role of the annual plan in the planning process. So people sometimes say, oh, it's not worth it to put a lot of effort into your annual plan because it will be outdated a few months later anyway. Like who cares what we thought 6 months ago? But often that's due to the misconception that the annual plan isn't meant to be an accurate projection of where the company will be 8, 9, 10, 11 months out. That's just not feasible, right? No one has a magic crystal ball, especially in this environment that we're in right now with a lot of change. But the point of the budget is much more to be a commitment, right? We go out, we communicate to our board, to our shareholders, other stakeholders, what we hope to achieve and how we plan to get there when we have a proper operating plan. And then when we compare actuals to the budget, it's about telling the story of how are we doing against that original commitment, and why are we off, right? Because you're going to be off. If you're lucky, you're favorable. If not, you're unfavorable, but you will be off. And the other thing that people need to keep in mind is, I think this quote puts it best. Eisenhower, he used to be a US president. He famously said, "Plans are nothing, but planning is everything." And what that means in the context of annual planning is that it's not about the document you produce, because as soon as you put it on paper, it will be inaccurate. It's much more about the process. So how do you go about it? How do you make sure that you get the other leaders in the company around the table and you challenge their thinking and you help them, uncover our tactics and strategies working? And if not, what are we planning to do differently? Or even if they are working, what can we do differently next year to accelerate growth and improve profitability? And so finance needs to lead that process and needs to make sure that these conversations happen.
Thank you so much for sharing, Christian. And I'm seeing some of the early questions already. But love how you position that budget as a process and an outcome that encompasses both the financials, but of course the operational metrics. So I'm seeing a comment here saying, "Hey, the annual operating plan, having the budget, do you think the budget needs to have the operating assumptions that fit into the budget? How do you think of potentially an annual operating plan and a budget? And, is this often the same document? It's sometimes different outputs from different teams. And what are the best practices there, really?"
Yeah, so it's also depends on how companies are using the term. Those terms are sometimes used interchangeably. Some companies mean different things. I worked at companies where we called it the budget, but it really was the operating plan. Really what it comes down to is that it's not just putting numbers into Excel and then that's your budget, that's your plan. It needs to include strategies, tactics, and action plans for every department that meaningfully contributes to the success of the company.
Well, thank you, Christian. Key takeaway for me is, of course, go very deep into your operational metrics and KPIs within the context of the budgeting process, so that it can become effectively your operational plan to drive performance throughout the year, right? So financials only, hey, unfortunately, not good enough anymore. Cool. Let's move on, right? I think very exciting questions ahead of us. As you know, many companies struggle to connect their budget to their actual operations, right? And what do you think that disconnect is so prevalent? Why is that the case? And what are some of the most significant consequences?
Yeah, actually, let me explain that with by sharing an actual story that happened to me a few years ago when I joined a new company. I was leading FP&A team there, and it was like stepping into a whirlwind because I joined right when the budget season was in full swing. Sometime in October, November, and I was barely through the door when I realized that this was much more chaotic than I was used to, because spreadsheets were flying right, left, and center, new versions all the time. And everyone was so scrambling to hit the targets. The sales team was kind of in a tug of war with the operations team. Marketing had their unique projections that didn't really match up with anyone else's projections. And the C-suite, I had the feeling that they just wanted numbers that looked good for the board meeting, right? And so the whole process felt like a giant game of telephone, with the initial message getting lost among all those different interests and interpretations. And as the FP&A leader, my job, as the way I saw it, was to bring order to this chaos, right? To harmonize the different perspectives and create a realistic budget. Wasn't easy. At first I didn't even know where to get started. But then a realization hit me. Initially I thought that everyone put their own department's needs first before those of the company. But then I realized that instead it was simply a lack of communication. People just didn't talk enough to each other. And as a result of that, there was a gap in understanding the bigger picture and how everything comes together. So I focused on communication. I started with scheduling one-to-one meetings with the head of departments to really listen to them, to listen to their concerns and what their point of view is. And the more I listened, the more I realized that how siloed everyone was. How the marketing didn't really understand the position of sales. Sales didn't understand the realities that the operations team was facing. And they were all focused on their own department's performance without seeing the bigger picture. So I decided to get everyone in the same room. We scheduled a big budget workshop. It lasted for most of the day. We laid out all the projections, all the targets. I encouraged people to really share their concerns about the future of the company. And it started off a bit rough, but it definitely was a bit messy. But it was necessary. And in the end, everyone understood the trade-offs, because really what budgeting should be about is finding the trade-offs and making decisions about, which trade-offs to take and which not to take, because they're good and bad trade-offs. And I played the role of facilitator. I helped everyone make sure to put the facts on the table, make sure, we separate between data-based assumptions and more like hopes and dreams, right? And how then everything rolls up into the entire company. That was a big contribution that my team did as well. And in the end, we had a usable budget. And for me, even though it was painful to get there, it really unlocked it for the next year, because in the next year, we focused much more on communication right away. And then the budgeting process runs more smoothly. So I saw also in the chat that Lucas asked, what tips do you have for establishing these processes? Communication is the number one. The second one is you need to be careful about the role that you play as the finance leader, as the finance team in the budgeting process. Because I sometimes see two extremes. Either finance thinks, it's our job to create the budget. So maybe they talk to people, but then they just open their spreadsheet and they create the budget, right? That's not good, because that's then too detached from the day-to-day realities that people face. And it's also difficult to get buy-in if finance creates the budget on their own, or almost on their own. Because the other department leaders, they see it as the finance projection and they don't see it as their own. In the other extreme, finance just plays the consolidator. I've seen this in many companies as well, where finance sends out the templates, the spreadsheets, or maybe they even use the planning software. But then they just consolidate the department inputs, send it to the CFO and say, here you go, here's the budget. Also not ideal, because of course, we can do much more. We can add much more value than just consolidate the numbers and maybe ask a few questions. So what I recommend is to do a combination of the two. Finance should create a top-down plan, and the departments create a bottom-up. So I think these, some of you joining here are familiar with those terms, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, a top-down plan is where you start with your targets, you break it, and you look at, okay, what needs to be true to hit those targets. But the important thing here is that we're not doing that at a very high level. Ideally, we do it based on drivers. I talk about that more later. It should be more than just, we hope to be able to get to this revenue and profit number somehow, right? That's the top down. The bottom up really is the combination of all the plans, all the tactics that each department will work on for the next year. And then you add all these up, and then that's your bottom up. And the reason it makes so much sense to create both is that then you can have a conversation by comparing the two. The finance team can have a meeting with the marketing team and say, hey, based on our top down, we think we should be able to get many leads, that many conversions, that many new customers. And then the marketing team can compare that to their bottom up, and you can have a conversation about why is there such a big gap? Because most of the time, you will have a gap there, right? Most of the time, the top down is more conservative. The top down is more aggressive because it's done by the leadership team, a bit farther away from the day to day, and the bottom up is more conservative because it's done by the people who have to execute and have to hopefully achieve those targets. But by combining them, you can find the middle that sometimes makes the most sense, and most importantly, have a more in-depth conversation around how operations link with financials, which is really what we're talking about here.
Kristen, thank you so much. That's been super thorough and super insightful. And I love how the magic happens when bottom up meets tops down in that meaningful conversations, right? What resources are needed maybe to then hit those top down targets? What are the operational bottlenecks? And having finance and FP&A at the center of that strategic conversation is what truly makes FP&A and a strategic finance team, right? And let me pick up a question here from Jeff, which is very interesting, right? Before we move on to the next part of the masterclass, but how would you recommend creating department budgets for the first time, right? That first time where potentially it's a bit more painful than when you have the inertia.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Jeff. So, if you're working in a company that has never done this full budgeting process before, it's better to keep it simple and really make it as non-disruptive as possible for your cross-functional business partners, because they have to go through at least one cycle to really see the value that this process brings, and you don't want them to be right away concerned that it's just an additional ask from the finance team. It takes away from the day-to-day. It takes a lot of time. You want to avoid that, so you need to make it as simple as possible for them. So make sure that you have very clear, easy to use Excel templates for them to provide their inputs, or even a planning software, even better. And then keep it simple. You don't need to have 50 different drivers for every forecast. It's okay to keep it simple. And it actually makes sense, because then also when you do the tracking, you will get more out of the variance analysis, because the simpler you keep it at the beginning, the more you can then find out how accurate your assumptions were going into it. The mistake would be to make your first budget so complicated that you can't really learn anything from the variance analysis, because it's really an iterative process. So keep it simple, and make sure that you help your cross-functional partners as much as possible at the beginning.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing, Kristen. And maybe let's move on to the next one. I've often heard you talking about your operating plan being a living plan, right? And hey, that sounds great. But it's oftentimes a departure from how organizations operate today, right? There is this gap. So can you elaborate a little bit more as to what you mean with a living plan, and why is it so important? And then also, how do we get there?
Yes. So first of all, what this doesn't mean is that you keep changing your budget every month, every quarter. The budget, the operating plan, and sorry, I use the terms also interchangeably. When I say budget, I mean operating plan, needs to stay static, because, as I mentioned, that was the original commitment. Our commitment to our board, to our investors doesn't change. But of course, reality changes, right? Things happen, and you will likely not be able to hit exactly the number you gave during the planning process. So you need to reforecast. I've seen it's a mix what companies are doing. I typically recommend to have a monthly process, simply because you learn so much from iteration. If you only do it twice a year or even quarterly, the time you just don't get that much practice, and you don't get much feedback. You don't get much data from the variance analysis. So I would recommend to do it monthly if you can. And then how you do those reforecasts is you use your annual plan as the foundation for it. That's super, super important, because you need to make sure that there's always a bridge, there's always a link of your forecast to your annual plan, because otherwise it will be very difficult to get buy-in from the cross-functional team. Because if you do it the right way, they were heavily, heavily involved for the annual planning process. They gave their inputs. They reconciled it with your top-down. They aligned on the final point of view. And so if you do something completely different for your monthly forecasts, then they'll say, okay, I was fine with the annual plan, but now what finance does, it's what finance does. I'm not sure if I agree with that. You want to avoid that. So how can you do that, right? How can you make sure that you're reforecasting in a way that's connected to your annual plan? So there are a few ways to do that, and the one I like the best is to have a driver-based plan. And so let me actually show you an example of what it looks like, because it's a bit easier if I show you. Let me share my screen here.
That's cool. Fantastic to have a hands-on and very practical approach. Masterclasses are great with tactical and actionable pieces of guidance.
Yeah. So this is a driver-based plan that's very similar to something we actually used at a software as a service company, a subscription-based company. So these are the number of subscriptions. That was 2024, then 2025 in this example. And then here we had business drivers. So for example, we wanted to invest in unaided awareness, in other words, in the strength of our brand and how well people recognize our brand. And and then there's a resulting number of subscriptions from that. That's one number here, but there could be a big effort behind that to get to that number. In our case, we had a data science team who helped us with that. We also invested in direct response marketing. So that's your normal ads that you see on social media. We accounted for inflation. We had a new promotion strategy that we knew, we wanted to dial back our promotions, and actually that had a result of reduced subscriptions. And we also knew that if we don't do anything, then our conversion rate will drop over time. And because we didn't factor in the product improvements yet, that came as a next step in this process, we had a negative number here. And then and how you arrive at these numbers is by closely collaborating with the experts, with the people in the company who actually have to drive those numbers, and trying to be as database as possible, running experiments, looking at historical performance. But then once you have that, what's really cool about it is, one, it's very easy to do scenarios. And I always recommend you do scenarios when you do the annual plan, also when you do reforecast, because then, let's say 4,200 subscriptions is not what the leadership team expected. They expected more than that. Then you can have a conversation. You can say, hey, actually, we hired a data science team. We think unaided awareness increase will bring us more subscriptions. So we're fine with using the aggressive scenario there. But for direct response marketing, we've done that a lot in the past, and we're just not seeing those results anymore. So let's stay with the balanced scenario. And then you can add those up, and you can quickly see, okay, the new number is much closer to where we need to be. And then you can have a much more detailed conversation about, okay, where did we take risks? Where did we not decide to take risks? And you can quantify the amount of risk you took when you present this to the board and to others. And the other big advantage of a driver-based forecast is that it's easy to update it every month, right? You do it for your annual budget, but then it's a living, breathing document that whenever you get new news, you get new data, you get actuals, you update it. So that makes it possible to connect your annual plan to your forecasts, and thereby getting that buy-in and that continuous link to the original story.
Christian, thank you so much. And I'm seeing some amazing questions from the audience. So please keep them coming. Given the nature of those questions, we're going to tackle them in a few minutes. Those are very exciting and related to some topics we're going to be covering with Christian now. So I'm keeping an eye here on the chat to make sure, hey, everybody, or as much as possible, we cover everything. Cool. Love the example about driver-based planning and how to connect that with a scenario planning, right? And how do you need to stay close to the business and those insightful, also decision makers to come up with these very well-informed drivers. And of course, you mentioned as well that driver-based planning is a way to keep the budget alive through monthly updates, right? So can you expand a little bit on how finance teams can develop a driver-based plan?
Yeah, so the first one is you can't have 50 drivers there, right? Probably your business has 50 different ways to invest, 50 different ways to drive revenue. But if you put that many drivers there, it really loses value because it's more difficult to update, it's more difficult to explain, and also testing whether these assumptions hold true. The assumption of X increase in marketing investment will yield Y in sales. You need to test that. You need to take a close look at that every month when you refresh it. And when you have 50 drivers, you can't do that. And so you need to break it down to the maybe 7 to 10 most impactful drivers. And that requires business understanding, right? It requires you as the finance leader to be incredibly close to, what the different departments are doing. And so you need to develop that business understanding. And how I recommend you do that is first test your own knowledge by going through your P&L and linking it to the business. So for example, for revenue, ask yourself questions like, which trends and seasonalities do you see in each revenue items? Why do those trends and seasonalities exist? How do your business partners attempt to accelerate or reverse those trends? And when you feel like you can't fully answer those questions for yourself, you can't write it down, then go and talk to your business partners. Make sure you close that understanding gap. Also ask questions like, yourself, like, what have my business partner tried this year to move the needle? What worked? What didn't work? What are they planning to do differently? And then when it comes to expenses, go through each expense line item in your P&L and think about how does this expense item contribute to the success of the company? What goal is linked to each item? And then importantly, how do we define, measure, and track the success of each line item? And again, if you can't answer one of those questions, then it's a signal to yourself, okay, I need to talk to my cross-functional business partners and really get a better understanding. Then also super important when you do driver-based forecasting is you need to be able to quantify the relationship between your business driver and the financials, and you need to be able to test and measure that. So I can give an example there. So when I was leading an FP&A team at Squarespace, a website builder company, we were testing investing more into ads that help build the strength of our brand. So those were not ads where we asked people to try our software or to purchase our software. It was just to get the name out there. One of the examples was Squarespace. Also, we did a Super Bowl ad, a 20-second Super Bowl ad. And it was really meant to build the brand equity, to build the awareness. And it was fine to include it in the plan, but, to be honest, we were a little bit concerned at first because we didn't know how to measure that. How do you measure whether the strength of your brand improves? So after a lot of discussion, we realized that, okay, you can actually hire an agency that finds out through tracking social media and through doing surveys how well people know your brand and how they recognize your brand. Fine, so we can measure that. But then the next challenge was, how do we measure how that actually translates to sales? So we acknowledge that it won't immediately show an uplift in sales when we run an ad like this. But it takes more time because people need to see more touch points. But we struggled first to figure out, okay, how do we actually connect the brand image with sales? After working with data scientists and really looking at the data we had from the past, we were able to build a fairly complex model that bridged that and that showed us what the relationship was. And then we felt comfortable including it in the budget. So it's super important that you do this. Sometimes it can be difficult, but it's definitely worth it.
Christian, thank you so much for sharing. And I think the next question is related to what Wagner is also posting in the chat. So again, don't be shy, share all of your questions. And he's asking, how detailed should the reforecast be? Say, for instance, I know vendor A will increase their bill by 1K, right? $1,000. Should I account for this, or should they be more high level, right? So OPEX increasing 1% month on month, right? Something like that. So level of granularity, right? Which couples well with a question I had prepared for you that I think is highly relevant for the audience, because you are emphasizing this relevance of operational metrics and KPIs together with financials, right? And I wonder, how granular should finance leaders go with the finance KPIs for different departments? And how do we ensure those KPIs are truly aligned with the overarching financial objectives? So really two questions in one. Let's just start with operational KPIs and that granularity with business leaders. But also when it comes to reforecasting, what's the right level of granularity? How do we ensure we are moving the needle and investing our time and energy in something that matters?
Yeah, I'll start with the KPIs and then I'll loop back to McNair's question. So when it comes to deciding which KPI should you track, should you forecast, I always recommend working backwards from the strategy you're trying to assess. So you have a strategy that the team's implementing, you know the tactics behind it because you've done the work in the plan. If not, you do it for the next reforecast. And then you work backwards from there. So what that means is first you define what it means to successfully implement a strategy. So how would what would you want to see in your financials if this strategy works out well? Then you identify what needs to be true to get there, who needs to deliver it, and then what are the tactics to execute against that strategy. Once you have the tactics, you can brainstorm ideal metrics to measure the success of the tactic. And I say brainstorm because it's super important that you start with a longer list. Don't yet think about, can we even track this? Do we even have the data? Just make a long list of what the ideal metrics are, because then usually, you're more creative. You may look at things that give you an even earlier reading into what's going on. And then once you have that, take the second pass, look at, okay, do we have the data? How difficult is it to get the data? Do we need to implement a new system, for example, to get clean data, or can we do it with existing tools? And then given the availability, feasibility, you decide which of those many metrics you decide to track. So that's how I would decide the granularity. Looping back to McNair's question. So it really depends. So McNair asked, okay, so for instance, I know vendor A will increase the bill by 1,000. Should I account for this? It really comes down to developing a good feeling for materiality. So with anything we do, but very, very important for forecasting is this 80-20 mindset that we need to have in finance. So we need to figure out what are the 20% of activities that drive 80% of the revenue. And we need to understand what are dollar amounts that I should care about and what are dollar amounts that I should not care about, right? Because if you're a $100 million company, $1,000 does not move the needle, right? You definitely do not need to forecast on that level. But it may differ according to which part of the budget you forecast, because some areas have much more focus than others. And so you need to do that in alignment with your leadership team to get an idea for, okay, what is the level of materiality that we need to use? And then important also, I've seen companies struggle with that, need to stick to that. You make a decision for what we should care about, what we should include for the forecast. And then even if leader A says, yeah, but I want to shift money, $5,000 here, please make sure to reflect it into your forecast. No, if $5,000 is material, I'm not going to do that. So that's how I would approach that.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. And if I may, so many of our customers get quite granular, and of course there are ways to make it easy, right? But in general, for instance, to your question on OPEX planning, right? And Yeah, so for the bigger vendors, probably you want to do vendor by level, so vendor level forecasting, and that might make sense, right? So maybe your AWS bill or some of those is huge, right? So probably you want to have an accurate forecasting because it's material, to Christian's point. But oftentimes, then for the long tail, probably you want to group them, and then yeah, go driver base with a percentage, and that's totally okay. I think we see our customers truly focusing on what matters, right? And making sure they have the time and the energy to be a business partner, to be close to the business, to understand the key drivers better instead of getting too lost in certain details that, yeah, like nobody really cares so much, right? So it's this level. Cool. Let's move on. I think we are opening up the point of technology now, and we have 3, 4 questions in the chat related to AI or technology and tools and frameworks. But hey, the initial question, and then we'll get to the audience questions, is that obviously technology is playing a critical role here, right? Making this almost effortless, right? This more easier access to operational KPIs and getting closer to collaboration with business partners and so on. Christian, what are your thoughts on the role of budgeting and planning software in making this transition process more efficient?
Yeah, so I highly recommend if you're just using Excel right now to look at a planning software, because I've seen both. I've worked at companies where we didn't have a planning software, and I didn't really know what I was missing because I didn't know what these tools could do. But then I worked at companies that have very advanced planning tools, and it's just a night and day difference. You get automated data collection, consolidation, reporting, collaborating with other teams is a lot easier. You don't need to consolidate Excel spreadsheets. They just put it into the software, and then you see the update immediately. You get all the reporting. You can easily have different scenarios. And then also have what's called self-serve reporting, where you can give a dashboard to a leader and they can look at the cuts of the data the way they want to see it. You don't need to create 20 different slides with 20 different ways to look at your performance anymore. They can just do that in the dashboard. But actually, I want to share a brief story there as well, because when I was at a different company before, the large multinational company, I was partnering with the marketing team, and we were responsible for the marketing forecast. And it was a big marketing budget. It was in the hundreds of millions. And the company only used Excel when I joined. And I thought that it was crazy because we had 15 different teams would give us inputs, all these huge spreadsheets. Each of those 15 spreadsheets had 10 tabs, and we had to consolidate everything. And so I went to the CFO and I pitched, hey, we should get a planning software. I made a concrete recommendation. I shared how much time my team would save and, how we could, spend the time to become better business partners and help our business partners more. And I thought I did a good pitch, but the CFO said no. And so I was surprised, but I went back to the drawing board. I talked to other leaders and asked, hey, what does he care about? What is top of his mind? And what people told me is that actually financial controls are top of his mind. And so I actually didn't really go into that in my previous pitch, but what these planning tools do is they make it so that you don't have to be afraid of mistakes. And I understood that he's afraid of that because, we give him the forecast and then he presents that to the board. And so his reputation is on the line if there are, mistakes there. And so I did my pitch again, and I highlighted how in the past we had some near misses where we almost used the wrong version, or we almost had a formula error because one of our business partners did something in the Excel file that broke something that we didn't realize at first. And when he saw that, and that how a planning tool just completely solves that because it's all in the cloud with an audit trail, and it's just impossible to have these mistakes that can happen in Excel, he immediately said yes and gave us the funding to implement the tool. So it sometimes depends on what do people really want to get out of it. Oh, you're on mute, Julio.
Apologies. Um, Thank you so much. And now we'll tackle some of the questions in the audience, but I loved your example as to, of course, software is about automation and saving time and making you more efficient. But of course, to your point, it's also about building that confidence in your planning, in your reporting, and of course, driving better decisions and being able to become that business partner. And that's fantastic, a fantastic insight. I guess that, we need to use a variety of pitches, right, to anchor the ROI. Cool. I think one of our early questions is the following, right? Do you have or do you use a certain framework tool to get the bottom up from departments? Any way that, you prefer that, you found useful in the past?
Like, so I've done it with Excel a number of times. And my courses, I also teach how to do that and how to build the Excel template, because some companies don't have a tool. But like I said, I think it's really important that you look at what tools are on the market. They all have different price points. There are also some, in the past, it used to be that only large companies could afford those tools, but now they become more and more affordable. Small, medium-sized businesses have those as well. So I would, highly recommend you use that for. So when it comes to the bottom up, you may still have to use some Excel if they have very detailed models behind it, and that's also something where you can compare tools, because some of them also are more flexible, and you can use operational metrics in the cloud, which makes this even more powerful, because then you don't just have your financials in the cloud, you also have the operational metrics, and you can really do driver-based forecasting in a software that makes scenario planning a lot easier.
Thank you, Christian. I think there it's very important to have access to all the metrics that matter in one place, so that the tool can really bring on board a lot of operational KPIs, and it's very flexible to manipulate them. And also that it's very collaborative, right? That it has structured workflows for finance teams to share information and gather manual input from business partners in a very easy way. So there are very clear structural workflows that make it very easy, right? And seamless, without error-free manipulation of spreadsheets. I think there are a couple of questions related to, of course, AI. And let me tackle at least one. With increase, and I know you and I have spoken a lot about this, so this is, I think, highly relevant for everyone. With increasing use of AI, apologies. With increasing use of AI, could you please advise how can we use AI to avoid anomalies, potentially maybe anomaly detection, but to avoid anomalies and fix the easily fluctuating nature of the operational process, and also have a better way of creating a budgeting plan?
Yeah, so AI can make this process a lot easier. Now, when it comes to AI, it's important to differentiate between generative AI, that's your ChatGPT, your Gemini, your Claude, and machine learning. So generative AI, there's a lot of talk about it. It's still very new, and we're just starting to figure out how to use that in finance. But then machine learning has been around for over 10 years, and machine learning basically takes your historical data and uses it to spot trends, and then using those trends to make projections into the future. And machine learning is fantastic at spotting anomalies, better than humans. The technology is very mature. It's been around for a long time, and it's built into some of the planning tools we talked about. And so, I would highly recommend that you use that in addition to other forecasting techniques. I wouldn't say, just rely on the machine learning output, because there are some downsides to it as well. I think we'll actually talk about this in a future webinar in this series to go more into the detail there, but it can be super helpful.
Well, related to that, a question that also came up in the chat. I support a driver-based planning approach to radically simplify the annual planning process, right? Which is an amazing starting point. Have you seen in any companies the use of AI as part of driver-based planning?
Absolutely. And especially, again, machine learning. So in the example I gave earlier, where we tried to figure out how does improving the brand strength and how people recognize the brand, how does that translate to sales? We had to use machine learning for that. It was such a complex question. We had so much data at our fingertips because the company has been around for over 10 years. And so, you need a good amount of data. You don't need 10 years. You can certainly do with less as well for machine learning. But it was just the ideal use case for us because machine learning is so good at spotting these trends. And then we could use that to get an idea of we increase our brand strength by X. How does that translate to sales in the future?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, oftentimes we see that with AI and ML driven time series forecasting algorithms, usually actually the number of years that you need to produce a good outcome, so a good forecast, is being compressed, right? So these algorithms are being improved. So when before you needed potentially 48 data points, today you might need 36, even 24, right? So shortening this for a high level of accuracy in the output. So technology is evolving. Obviously, not all of finance teams are able to spend the time to be all the time at the edge, and obviously, software vendors are, we do this, right? Investing in where the areas that matter. And Christian, we've covered a lot of ground today. Before we open up for more questions that we have in the chat and some others that I know, please share any questions that you have. Don't be shy. I would love that you summarize the key takeaways for the audience and touch on what finance leaders should do if their annual plan resembles more of a traditional budget instead of a truly living plan.
Yeah, happy to summarize. So the first takeaway we had was that a budget is different from an operating plan. Your annual plan should include the strategies, tactics, high-level actions that across the company, because then you can tie financials to what you're actually doing, and you can better measure success and reconcile success. And the main objective of the budget process shouldn't be to create these P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, but to facilitate deep thinking across the company around whether current strategies and tactics need to change in the next year. And then finance shouldn't create the budget, and finance also shouldn't be the one who just does the consolidation, but instead finance needs to lead the process and make sure that the right discussions are happening at the right level. And then you have a top down and a bottom up, and you compare the two to each other. And then the operating plan becomes a living document. If your monthly forecast could also be quarterly updates built on the annual plan, and you can do that different ways. I'm a big fan of driver-based forecasting. And then you need to identify the right metrics to track. You do that by starting with the strategy and then working backwards from there in terms of how do you measure it. And then lastly, we talked about planning software that can make your planning process significantly easier, more robust, and also more collaborative.
Christian, thank you so much. I think I really appreciate this summary and this overview, very actionable, tactical, down-to-earth points for us to get better the minute we leave this webinar. Let me take some very relevant questions. I'm seeing one question from Lucas here. What's your advice for integrating non-financial metrics, right? The key of an operational plan. How do you integrate non-financial metrics? For instance, he's referring to customer success, employee engagement, but you have many others, right, that can be relevant into an operational plan that stems from a financial budget.
Yeah, so before I answer the question, just a quick point here. It's not that the operating plan stems from the financial budget. It should actually be the other way around. You start with the operating plan, and then from that, you arrive at your financial budget. And when you start with the operating plan, you naturally integrate those metrics. You start by looking at, okay, what are the metrics that really matter? Employee engagement, for example, can be a major driver if you're struggling from a lot of turnover, from a lot of people leaving, and you struggle with rehiring people, you struggle with having to onboard new people quickly. Then you can say, well, if we improve our employee engagement, we should be able to reduce turnover by X. And as a result, we improve the effectiveness of our sales team, of our marketing team, which will then lead to more sales. So that's how you can improve that, how you can do that. You also mentioned customer satisfaction. So of course, very important when you're a subscription-based company where you want to reduce churn. The higher your customer satisfaction, the longer people stay with you and the less you're relying on your marketing team to get new leads, to get new customers. So if you start with a strategy, with the tactics, then you're naturally integrating your operating metrics into your financials, because that's how you arrive at your financials.
Christian, thank you so much. We also have some other questions in our Q&A chat, might be private, but I think if I couple a couple of them is the why, right? So what are the benefits of moving into a more operational cadence? What are the benefits for the company, for the finance team, for the management team, when finance team truly turn this budget into an operational plan that is more recurrently updated and closer to business performance?
Yeah, I'd be talk a bit more about that. I mean, for one, it's much easier to get collaboration of the cross-functional leaders every month when you update the forecast every quarter. Because if you just say, well, here's the updated P&L, here's the updated forecast, it might be difficult for them to really understand it, to get behind it, to see, okay, what does it mean for me? But if you say, well, HR leader, it's your job to increase employee engagement by X, and here's how that translates into lower turnover, translates into a better performance of sales and marketing, and translates into more sales, then they're much more connected to the financial performance of the business, and they're more likely to actually help you, because then the HR leader can say, oh, we have these three initiatives planned to improve our employee engagement, and we actually expect that we have some new news. I told you 3 months ago this will do X, but now we think it will be better based on initial data we've seen. And then you can say, oh yeah, great, I'll update the forecast. And that way, it's not just the finance team doing the forecast, it's really a collaborative forecast. And then you can also hold people accountable. You can say, well, wait a minute, 3 months ago, you told me this, now it's different. Can you walk me through what happened, right? And how we can learn from that. And then finance can just add a lot more value, by asking these challenging questions and then helping us discover what's behind the performance.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Christian. Amazing insights. And I think this is a very relevant point, right? So, of course, we in finance are very glad to be sharing the updated financial statements and a few other metrics, every month, right? But that is not truly strategic impact, right? So when we are, as you say, closer to the business, closer to the operational KPIs, and having those performance conversations, having that more accurate and regular updates in the forecast to see where the business is, this is the gist of a strategic finance, right? So those many teams that you've led in the past. So cool. I think we are coming to an end. So it's been very fast, but really appreciate this, Christian, and I'm very excited about the 2 other masterclasses we'll be having with you around the same backbone topic. How do we become more strategic in the organization, in the form of how do we turn a static budget or a budget that sometimes falls stalled into a more operational living plan. I loved the living plan example. So, if I may, I will borrow it.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to those conversations as well. And I had a lot of fun today. Thanks so much for having me, Julio.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been a blast having you. I know you enjoyed. We look for you in the next session and masterclass with Christian. Speak soon.